Hello and welcome to BA Brew. I'm Pete.
Hello, I'm Danny.
And I'm Jonathan.
And today we're going to be talking about Moon Rose fish. And I've gone for the English spelling there, or the English pronunciation, because I don't want to attempt the Dutch, but I'm sure Danny will oblige for us in a moment. So I'm sure everyone's kind of desperate to find out what these three seemingly unrelated words are all about. So Danny, I don't know whether you could kick us off.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Tom. Moonroos fish is translated into Dutch as Maan, Roos, vis. Almost the same words, I think. But to many Dutch people, it's a well-known set of three words which indicate at elementary level learning to read and write. It's a very popular, even commercially available method for schools to start off with elementary reading and writing for young kids. So if you drop the words Maan, Roos, vis in a Dutch environment, a lot of people will nod and say, we know that, our kids, or maybe if they're young enough, they themselves connect that to learning to read and write. So very basic language system.
So significant. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Well, I came on to Moonroos fish because I think it's a lot nicer than ABC. That's a bit dull. And it also indicates to me a kind of an elementary, back to basic thought about our business of business analysis and specifying IT technology systems. So that's the thought, and that's the catchphrase, back to basic, Moonroos fish. You might even say a small internal checklist. Is everything in order? Do we have Moonroos fish?
Right. Yeah. So it's the foundations, the fundamental elements. Then in that sense. Jonathan, what are your thoughts? Yeah.
I need to know what they are. I know Danny's given us a bit of a brief intro pre-pod, but Danny, could you? Yeah. I've seen they relate to the IT component, the IT requirements. What does Moonroos fish mean individually?
Yeah, to me, and it's not a formal way of connecting these things. It's for me personally a catchphrase. In Dutch, it's called an ezelsbruggetje, but I will not ask you to pronounce or translate that. It's a rule of thumb, you might say. And to me, it stands for three very basic parts of the specification, requirements, you might say, of an IT system. And in that Maan, to me, stands for the things that the system is about, the things that you need to register, things that you need to process. Formally, you might call it the data model, data description. Roos stands for the things, how things look. So the user interface, the way screens, reports look. Roos is a beautiful thing. And the way it looks is represented to me by Roos. And fish is to me connected to movement, to dynamic behavior. So it stands for the activities, the rules, you might say the process changes that are to be specified in any IT system. So if you have those three elements, the things, the way it looks, and the way it behaves, you're on your way to specifying the complete description, requirements, you might call it several things, of a system.
So I mean, that's an interesting one. I mean, to me, that can kind of correspond a little bit in terms of data modeling and process modeling and dynamic modeling and things. We often talk about there being sort of three views of a system. So I think there's a definite connection there. Jonathan, any other thoughts?
So I quite like it. I like the ABC. You've got to learn your ABC. So you've got to learn to walk before you can run. And so this is as a model, if we're starting out thinking if we've got a complete set of requirements for an IT solution, we've thought about things. Does it contain the data? What does it look like, the interface? And then what it does, the activity and the rules. And I really like the inclusion of the rules. I think business rules are often overlooked in terms of the level of importance. The other thing that I think is often overlooked, and I'm probably guilty of this, is looking at the data. And I don't know whether or not it's because I come from a process background, hence I'm a bit more comfortable with the activity and the rule side, but the data that the solution is going to contain, the requirements for that data, I think lots of BAs are fearful of looking at, and maybe don't learn that area of business analysis or IT requirement specification, and maybe as much as they could, which I do think is really important. And I quite like it. It's ABC, but we know that there's other things in the alphabet, so we can expand beyond the IT system requirements. We can look at the holistic business system as well. But if we get these core fundamentals wrong, or we miss one of them, there's a problem. There's likely to be a problem in terms of our requirements and then the end solution.
The beauty for me is also that, Moonrose fish doesn't suggest any order, and it doesn't suggest any importance. So, because if you say ABC, or if you say 1, 2, 3, which is also a nice catchphrase, that immediately suggests some, the first, the next, and then the next. Yeah. And Moonrose fish doesn't hold that connection at all. So I sincerely believe that they're equally important. And of course, I have my preferences. I once, a little anecdote, I once held a passionate talk one evening about these 3 things, 3 modeling types. And then at the end of the talk, I asked the audience, if you had to choose only one modeling part, which one would you choose? And I did a Mentimeter. And to my disappointment, only 5% of the people voted for the moon, which I think is a shame, because I think the moon is more or less, the data is more or less the fundamental thing you build the rest upon. But I can imagine that people like fish better, or they look at the roads and think it better than the moon. But in essence, it is 3 different things which represent 3 different things which are equally important, which don't have an order or something like that. And if you say, Jonathan, I'm not the data model enthusiast, it doesn't have to be that someone needs to get everything. So you can ask someone to help you, or you can divide the analysts amongst, especially some people are better at going into the dirty details of proper definitions or something like that, and other people are better at let's make it look good.
I think that's a good point. Sorry, Jonathan, I didn't mean to butt in there, but I think that is a good point, because certainly a lot of BAs tend to be very process driven, like Jonathan. And I think that's one of the nice things about this session is that Danny and I do have quite a detailed background in data. We're probably in the minority there, but a lot of BAs do tend to have that process view, but they don't always think about the other things. Sometimes there is that maybe overemphasis on one view, and what you're saying is, that these are equally important. We need to think about all of them, otherwise we're not going to be successful in doing that. So I think that's quite an interesting angle. And also, as an apprentice mentor on the BA apprenticeship scheme, as Jonathan is as well, we often find that the BA apprentices really struggle with the data side of things. And having tried to teach data and data modeling to BAs for many, many years now, I find that for some reason there's a bit of a mental block on that. And it's a bit of a shame, because I'm a big fan of of BAs, trying to embrace as many different disciplines as possible, getting involved in some of the UX stuff and understanding the importance of that, as well as the data, as well as the process.
I wonder, Pete, if it's one of the reasons for a little bit of that mental block. Is it because we're used to configuring out of the box, off the shelf solutions and services, and those solutions and services have an inbuilt data model? And I wonder if there's a little bit of laziness from some BAs, and I'm pointing at myself here, with regard to making an assumption that the data model has been fully thought through, and therefore I don't need to model the data aspects of the requirements. Now, I'm just going to counter that. I think that if the data model of your off-the-shelf solution service doesn't fit your business, you need to recognize that very early on. And so I think there's been a failure in requirements and selection if the solution that you've purchased or have leased doesn't fit your business, then it's never going to work. So someone needs to have looked at that. But I think there's lots of BAs that presume that thinking's already happened, and therefore don't think that they need to model the data model. What do you guys think?
Well, it's not surprising, because often it really is already thought through and modeled, etc. But usually people who create a off-the-shelf solution try to keep it, of course, as generic as possible, which then brings on the salesmen who say, we can translate it to anything you want because it's very generic. It's just things. So it's not surprising that people think that it's already thought through, and also you don't see data definitions, you don't see relationships, etc., and built-in constraints and rules, but you do see the rows, you see the interface, and you do see or experience the behavior and the business rules. So it is more deep down, or you might say even hidden within the things that you notice of the system.
This is quite enlightening for me, really, because I guess because I've always been very much on the data side of things, I've kind of struggled to understand, well, why don't BAs see the data as something as part of their discipline? I mean, we have models like POP-IT, don't we? To think holistically, people, organization, processes, information, and technology. And I think that's fundamental to understand the information part. But I've always thought, BAs seem to think that it's actually something that's somebody else's responsibility. It's more technical. And I guess because they are used to looking more at that user interface and talking about what something needs to do rather than what data needs to support all of that kind of makes absolute sense. Having said that, I'm a big fan of getting to grips with the information, because if you don't understand the information, then how do you know that a particular solution, whether it's off the shelf or whether it's a bespoke solution, is actually going to support and meet the needs of the business? So yeah, that's an interesting one.
The salesperson saying, "Oh yeah, we can configure the solution to do whatever you want in terms of the data," sort of disarms quite early if they're believed that inquiry into the off-the-shelf solution or service model, and I think maybe there's a lack of confidence to challenge and to say to the solution provider, well, I want to see the data model, I want to see what it looks like, and that there's I think maybe been I don't know, you guys could share your thoughts on it, maybe a steering away from looking at the data models because of maybe a lack of skills, and then that combined with a lack of confidence, the presumption that someone else has done that work, or the data architect has done it, the solution architect has done it.
We as you might say, technicians, talk about myself, I'm an IT dinosaur, so to say. We are a bit
You're not the only one.
Luckily, we are not extinct yet. But perhaps we are a bit guilty of that ourselves, because a lot of the data models that we show or produce or make look very technical and look very as if you need to really learn the language of those models. So I also often go, okay, if you don't want or you don't or you're not able to show me the data model, can you then at least show me so that we can agree on, the definition of the things that are processed here? Because even looking really good into the definitions of the things that are processed already help you in understanding the information that is around. But if you throw people, class diagrams or whatever at them, it's quite natural to be scared, as opposed to if you throw screen models or things like that to people, because they can recognize that and they can immediately relate that to, that looks good. Oh, I see something, a button I can push on, etc. So it's a bit natural for people to stay away from that tricky technical part of data modeling or data definitions or something like that.
So one of the things I do, Danny, is I try to use scenario analysis to help with exploring, does the data model fit? Is it adaptable or not? And so asking questions around, if we've got an off-the-shelf solution, maybe we're configuring, can it be tailored to do this type of transaction? Can it contain this type of data? And it requires a bit of confidence to think of the scenarios, work with your stakeholders to think of the scenarios. But then the other thing I think about here is the importance of prototyping as well. So not taking at face value that yes, it can do it, and the talk from the salesperson, but thinking through, working through the scenarios and looking at the prototype and saying, right, well, how does it actually process? How would it actually function in that scenario? We've had one recently. We've got a concept of a diploma within Assist. We have diplomas, and the diplomas are built up of individual modules, certifications. We'll often have salespeople attempting to sell us off-the-shelf solutions that cannot cater for the concept of a diploma as an overriding entity over and above the certificates or the modules. And as soon as you get into the depths of scenario analysis, or you start looking at prototype, you realize that the solution's not fit for purpose. And it's a problem in the data model, whether I'm exploring that via what it does and through the interface, but knowing that it can't cope with the processing that I'm looking it to do, for example.
I've got a great example of that situation, actually. I mean, I'm an examiner for BCS, as indeed you are, Jonathan. And I remember going into a training provider, quite a big training provider, and they used a booking system for courses. And they tried to use their booking system for courses to book candidates on their individual exam slots so that they could arrange for the examiners to come in. They knew who was taking the exam at what time. But at one point, as an examiner, I turned up at the venue, and all of a sudden, all of the candidates were sitting in the waiting area. And it later transpired that the person that was using this booking system, the booking system was geared up for courses. So the course had a start time of 9 o'clock or whatever, and there was only one start time for that event. And they tried to sort of set this up. So, of course, everyone was told that the time they needed to be there was at 9 o'clock, even though some people had an exam in the afternoon at 3 o'clock. Because the system couldn't go down to that level of granularity in terms of the data to be able to specify for each candidate a separate time. So, these things are quite problematic in business terms, aren't they? Purely because somebody hasn't really fully understood the data and the business need. Does the data support that business need and that business requirement?
I can relate to that. And also, Jonathan, by going through scenarios, you can also get to the point that at some point there are decisions to be made, or a calculation to be made, or something, something that goes into we call it in Dutch wiebertje, the thing where you go either this way or that way in the model and in the behavior. And at that point, you can help yourself and your stakeholders into going deep into the question: do we really know? Do we really have all available information to make that decision, or to make that calculation, or to decide whether it's A or B, etc. So there are a lot of points at which you can relate to. Do we not only have our rows and fish documented or in place, but do we also have the moon supporting that rows and fish? So there are a lot of things. I think you can do a lot of things without mentioning things like ERD or class diagram or something like that.
So maybe those concepts, those techniques are almost getting in the way of BAs. It's putting them off having those kind of discussions because, no, we don't really want to get into all of that. That's the technical stuff. But it's better, to have some conversations about it than to say, right, that's someone else's problem, isn't it?
Is there another angle on this in terms of the value of the data itself when it's contained in the solution, and the insight that you can get as a result of, well-structured, accurate data with regard to your customers or your users or your partners? If you've got that, you've got an ability to potentially identify trends in your customer base, for example. You might gain insight that gives you ideas for new features or new services. And the business value of the data, I think, is also underestimated. And it's sort of assumed that if we've got the system, we'll be able to harvest the data and get the insights. But I'm not sure that always that assumption is correct, and that we should perhaps be placing more emphasis on what data do we want to capture, because that data is of value, immense value. It's an asset to the organization for its future in terms of what it does. And if you look at Amazon, taking the data that it has on its consumers to identify trends, predict new products, new services, and constantly checking back and seeing, well, are things working or not? Pete, I think you've been looking at some of this space recently in terms of data analytics.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting almost niche there for BAs, but understanding what the purpose of the data is, what data we need, and possibly sort of starting with the why. I know that's a popular view, isn't it? Start with why. What problems are we trying to solve? What questions are we trying to answer? What decisions are we trying to support and enable? And then say, right, well, in order to answer those questions, in order to make those decisions, what information do we need? And sometimes people maybe also get a bit caught up on the information versus data. Information is something that BAs find quite natural. It's part of the Poppet model, etc. As soon as you mention the word data, then people start to think, oh, that's something more technical, isn't it? But we don't need to split hairs between what is the difference between information and data. But just focus on the information side of it. What information do we need to support these business needs and to answer those questions? So I think there probably is something in there, isn't there?
Yeah. There's a technique called the information concept model, which is in the business architecture toolset, and business analysts can pick it up as well. And it models literally the information concepts of the business, and they're one-word descriptions of those pieces of information that are important for the business. And it's for me, a really useful technique to pick up and use for your business, and to start to build your confidence in modeling data. If you've seen ERD or a class model and you've been confused because of the notation, perhaps, this business information model or information concept model doesn't have a great deal of notation. It's got boxes with a word of the information and a line between the other information concepts that are related. So customer and event, for example, would be two information concepts that you'd link with two boxes. And there isn't any real other difficult bits of the notation. But just picking up and using some of these models, talking about them, asking for help, and having a go, because there's value in them.
Absolutely. I'm conscious of time, guys, and so we probably ought to sort of start to wrap this thing up. So if I can go to you, Danny, ask if are there any sort of final comments, thoughts that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, an observation on this BA Brew session itself is that we started off with saying that moon, rose, fish are equally important. There is no order. You need to have them all. And yet a good part of the rest of the talk is about the moon, which is funny because we say naturally we go about with the user interface and the behavior, which we all know, and the data information things model is a bit more perhaps technical or is a bit of a threshold for a lot of BAs. And yet we are, including Jonathan, talking about that the whole of the time. So that's a funny observation. And I agree, because if you don't get your information set in whatever way, right, it's a lot harder to change the data model or the registers than to change the way things look or than to change behavior.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's funny, we start out with it's equally important, and maybe...
And then we've done a deeper dive on
it's not that bad that moon is the first one.
Good point. Jonathan, any final thoughts, comments?
Maybe there's a listener sat there thinking, well, I don't have time to do that. My job's to write a user story, and we don't have time to think about the data. I don't have time to think about the business rules in detail, or some of the other aspects. And I'm just going to say, well, we should iterate and learn, absolutely, continuously improve and prototype. But if you don't think about it, who is going to think about it? And for me, if you're a business analyst, you're working in an agile context where your primary vehicle for writing your requirements is a user story, you should be thinking about the user story extension, given, when, then. Behavior-driven development has helped to popularize that particular extension. It helps you with the business rules, the interface, screen specifications, and or the prototypes. And using those, if you combine it with those given, when, then statements, combining that with scenario analysis can really start to help people to explore the data without necessarily bringing out an ERD diagram or a class diagram, but you're still getting to the depths of the detail and asking hopefully the appropriate questions to make sure the solution works.
Some good stuff there. So thank you very much to Jonathan and Danny for that. Thanks to everyone who's listening or watching. If anyone has any ideas for any future BA brews, please do email us on babrew@assistkd.com.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.